Thank you very much for coming on the program. Why are rental prices just going up and up and up?
Well, we've seen a bulk of rent price increments in the last 9 months from September last year, and the main reason for this has been the hike in interest rates. What's happening is a lot of would-be buyers are now shelving their buying plans and opting to rent houses instead. Now, given that we already had a shortage of housing stock, this is really allowing landlords to call for higher rents with the increased demand.
One debate which never seems to grow old and we've had for a while is those property costs, are they justified?
In Kenya, we're constrained by land costs, which have been spiraling upwards for a long time, but also the bulk of construction costs. So this is the two factors that are really leading to rising property prices. But we've seen now that property prices, while on the rise, have somewhat come to a flat level over the recent quarters.
So where do you see this heading? Where do you see the trend going?
Well, certainly with the drop in the CBK base lending rate, we do hope to see an increased take-up now in mortgages. But despite that, the rates are still quite high. So there is a tendency that buyers will still hold off, continue to rent. But because developers have slowed down on housing development, we expect that towards next year, prices will start to rise quite significantly due to shortage of supply.
So you definitely welcome the move by the Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee to bring down the CBR?
Definitely. Definitely. The hike had a terrible effect on the property market, particularly in the middle income segment. So this drop should hopefully lead banks towards dropping their rates, and hopefully the mortgage take-up will then increase.
But do you think that is going to have any major impact, considering house prices and property values, especially I'm talking about here, are up 3.14 times since the year 2000?
Yes, I mean, Kenya, from 2000 to now, Kenya had a lot of pent-up property demand, which is what has caused the escalation. The market has done well. The bottom line is that demand is still strong, supply is still much less than demand. So the housing market is set to continue growing.
There's that thing I was talking about earlier about there's a likelihood of a bust at some point in the property prices, and we can go somewhere where it's more sustainable.
This has always been the demand. The question really is there a property bubble? Is there a bust coming? The truth of the matter is, if you look at countries where property bust has happened, it's been largely linked to over borrowing. Now, if you look at the percentage of Kenyans that do borrow, it's very, very small. So the likelihood of sort of artificial demand is very, very low. I don't see that there will be a property bust anytime soon.
How do we compare to our neighbors or other countries in Africa?
Well, our property prices are quite high, and our markets are perhaps a little bit more developed than our immediate neighbors. Less so, I would say, than South Africa. But property prices in Kenya are regionally high.
The interest rates, you're projecting a greater trends towards house price growth. You talked about especially next year. Just flesh that out a bit more.
The reason for that is, you see, when the interest rates went up, a lot of developers postponed a lot of their house building. So people completed phase 1, and then phase 2 and 3, for example, are put on hold. Now, this was projects that were set to come onto the market in late 2013. So when 2013 arrives, there will be no housing completed. So there's a chance then at that time, as the demand now grows, supply will actually be much lower than we need it to be.
And we're seeing developments like, for instance, just a few days ago, a big investor putting up perhaps Kenya's largest mall along Thika Road, because that has expanded into a super highway. And as these developments come into effect, how does this change the play?
Well, Nairobi's landscape has changed substantially over the last 5 years. I think developments like that are very welcome because of the fact that they're now creating these little nodes around the city center. So Nairobi is spreading outwards. We saw mostly residential development in these areas, but residential development needs to be supported by commercial facilities, retail, recreational. Yes. So developments like this will definitely change the landscape of the city, but also I think it'll ease pressure on pricing in the main areas where, for example, land costs are really, really quite high.
And a lot of that development is so concentrated within the central business district and the areas around Upper Hill and Westlands. But do you feel that easing of price pressure you talk about will be so immediate and significant when we're expanding to places like Machakos and to Konza, for instance?
Not that immediate, because ultimately, if you look at any city in the world, downtown, for example, Manhattan, you look at London, those areas, the central areas still hold values quite strongly. But I do imagine that certainly on land price, you find a bit of easing.
The Kenyan government estimates about a 200,000 demand for units every year. That is not being met, is it?
Yes, it's not. Of note, though, is that demand is in the low and the middle income segment.
Yes.
So that's certainly not being met. In the upper segments, I would say the demand and supply are almost at equilibrium. But in the lower and middle, nope.
Because the other problem right now is mortgages. About only 15, maybe 20,000 mortgages in Kenya.
Correct.
Why is that such a big problem?
Well, historically, mortgages have been a very costly and cumbersome process. Getting a mortgage is approved, that kind of stuff has always taken a very long time. Buyers find it difficult. But I think that changed over the last couple of years. Banks have become increasingly friendly, increasingly competitive, and increasingly willing to lend. And I think that's changed the landscape of property a lot.
Let's talk about the investment side of this.
Yes.
Your report also shows that the returns from real estate investment in Kenya still outpacing investment in stocks and even fixed income securities.
Yes. Because with real estate, you look at twofold return. You look at the rental return and the capital return. So if you look at return, for example, you say, as we said, between 2000 and now, property prices have gone up 300%. So if you average that out, it's still a pretty good return compared to what you get on fixed income securities.
Right.
So even as the market has leveled off a little bit, the returns from real estate are still quite healthy.
And the Capital Markets Authority has now even published regulations regarding real estate investment trusts.
Yes.
What do you make of this?
I think this is a very positive move in the market. It allows developers and property investors to go to alternative routes to raise funding, and at the same time, it allows smaller investors also to access real estate, because real estate is generally considered a little bit illiquid. The entry costs are quite high. So having the real estate investment trusts is an easier way to access the market.
Do you feel our market is sophisticated enough for something like this?
I think so. And I think if we aren't, we'll get there very soon.
Okay, what is the next time you're giving this report in about another 6 months, what do you think you'll be telling us?
I think we'll probably see that rents are still high, possibly still increasing, because like we said earlier, the fact that a lot of people are remaining in rented accommodation. I think property prices will remain stable due to the interest rate factors, due to the upcoming general elections. But I think as we go into 2013, we'll start to see the property prices climbing. And I really hope that by then we'll see a much more lower mortgage rate, because that's what we need to spur this market.
All right, that's a great place to end it. Many thanks for Farhana Hassanali. She was the HassConsult, very fascinating Q2 market update on the property market in Kenya.